So today we have Dave Eng joining us for the Goose webinar series. Dave is an intellectual and creative director, an educator and designer, who combines games and theory and technology. Dave is a lifelong gamer and currently serves as a faculty member and educational technologist at NYU School of Professional Studies. Dave also hosts the podcast Experience Points, Experience Points, and consults at University XP on game-based learning. His interests include professional development, learning theory, technology, and games. And his fun fact that he gave us is that he has been seasick in every time zone, which is an impressive thing to do. Now I hand it over to Dave, and please put your questions in the chat, and let's kick it off, Dave.
All right, Sebastian, thanks for that great intro. Glad to be here, everyone. Also really happy to see a lot of familiar faces in the roster. So thank you for coming here. I appreciate it. So like Sebastian said before, this session is called Tabletop Games for Virtual Learning Environment. I realize that a lot of the other presentations you've probably seen have been very much wargame focused or simulations focused. What I want to preface before we get into the nitty gritty of tonight's presentation is that this one is really going to focus on tabletop games, specifically existing tabletop games, how their digital implementations can be played online, and also how you can use those digital implementations for teaching and learning online. So the other thing I want to point out is that there are going to be several QR codes in this presentation. If you're not really familiar with QR codes, you'll see one that's flashing here on the screen. Whenever you see a QR code, it's going to link to some additional resources. It would be beyond the scope of this individual presentation to really talk about it here. However, if you'd like to learn more about these individual resources, all you need to do is take your mobile phone or cellular phone, open up the camera app and point it at that QR code. You'll be able to get a link directly to that resource, and you'll be able to look at it for future viewing. So I just want to let everyone know that that is available there. In addition, Sebastian also has the slides that are going to be available after tonight's presentation. However, they are numerous and they go through a lot of different things. However, if you'd like to download a quick summary of everything that we are covering tonight, specifically in a few pages, there's going to be a link at the bottom left-hand corner that you see on this slide right here. And that link is going to be at the bottom left-hand corner of every individual slide for tonight's presentation. So if you don't want to parse through the entire slide deck, but instead just want to get a quick Word document summary of everything that we're covering here, feel free to click on that link or go to that link that's down there below. That link is bit.ly/ttggwu. Again, that link is bit.ly/ttggwu to get a quick summary of everything we're covering in tonight's presentation. And like Sebastian said before, please direct your questions to the chat. There's a very specific format that Sebastian is asking for questions in the chat, so please try to adhere to that format. I will be taking numerous breaks during tonight's presentation in order to address those questions. Just please direct all of them to the chat so that we have a central place that we can refer to all of them. We greatly appreciate it. All right, so with all that being said, again, this session is called Tabletop Games for the Virtual Learning Environment. I'm your host, Dave Eng. Like Sebastian introduced me before, I am a faculty member at New York University School of Professional Studies. I teach in the Certificate of Learning Design program, specifically focusing on teaching and learning online for faculty members and human resources professionals. I also run the website University XP, available at universityxp.com, where I write, record videos, and also podcasts about using games, gamification, and games-based learning for teaching and learning. All right, I want to spend a few moments to go over our content for tonight's presentation. So we're going to be covering 5 major areas. So the first one is, what is games-based learning? And then afterwards, we will cover just one, Hanabi, Codenames, and Wavelength. So there's going to be those 4 different games that we are covering in tonight's presentation. Just one, Hanabi, Codenames, and Wavelength. These are all currently published physical tabletop games. They also have a digital online presence. So the thing I'm going to do first is explain how you play that game, how you can play that game online, and then specifically what outcomes or learning outcomes you can use those individual games for. I know that a lot of you come from a lot of different and diverse educational and training backgrounds, so I try to make this as generalizable as possible. Not all of these games that you're going to be seeing here tonight will be applicable directly to what you're teaching or to who you're teaching to, but again, not all of these games are going to be designed for all students, so I encourage you to use your professional discretion in order to determine when you should use these games and where you should use them. So first thing off, let's talk about what is games-based learning, just so that we have a common language here. So in games-based learning, I want to talk about these areas. So let's first talk about games-based learning defined. So what exactly is games-based learning? Because you may have heard of this term, you may have heard of simulation, sims, gamification, project-based learning, or anything else. When I'm talking about game-based learning, I'm talking about using specific existing games. So this is not game design. These are going to be using games that already exist right now for students to help them achieve their specific learning outcomes. So whenever you hear me talking about games-based learning, I want to be very clear here that it's using existing games to help your students achieve specific learning outcomes. So the next question I want to identify here is, how do you choose the right games? Because there's a whole plethora of games out there. There's hundreds of thousands of different digital games, board games, tabletop games, card games, video games, mobile games, console games, PC games, and everything else. How do you specifically choose the right game for your students and for their outcomes? So I like to really concentrate on these two areas right here. So one, you can choose a game that will help your students acquire a specific skill, whatever that skill may be. Sometimes it's negotiation, sometimes it's strategic planning. It can be a whole host of any other different things. So first thing you want to identify is, what is the skill or what is the specific takeaway that my student's going to have after they finish playing this game? And then you base that on achieving a specific outcome. So now that you know that the student wants to achieve this specific skill, or you want them to achieve this specific skill, what is an example of a successful outcome here? Like if you're targeting negotiation, what should they be able to do afterwards? Do they negotiate a contract? Do they negotiate a simulation that replicates a diplomatic scenario or anything else? Specifically, what do you want them to be able to do at the very end that'll help them achieve that specific outcome? And in games-based learning, again, like I said, you can use a whole host of different games. You can use physical games, like the ones you see at Dave & Buster. You can use tabletop games. Chess is one of the oldest and most used examples. You can use card games. Poker is a really great game that not only identifies game theory, but a lot of other concepts such as Yomi, which is trying to identify a different player's intentions based on the current game state. We can use video games, PC games, and now we can start using mobile games. So games like Pokemon Go, while not designed directly for games-based learning, had an interesting side effect of getting players out there into the real world and exercising and being more active. So there's a lot of different ways that you can apply games-based learning, and you can apply games-based learning throughout all of these different mediums that you see over here. All right, so the next concept I want to talk about here is, how does games-based learning work? So two areas that I want to talk about here after you've chosen your specific game. So games-based learning works by prioritizing a specific learning outcome. Again, first you want to identify what is that skill, what is that outcome you want your students to achieve, and then selecting the appropriate game for that, and then prioritizing that as a specific learning outcome. One of the most common questions I get on a regular basis is, Dave, do I need to replace my entire curriculum and all of my content with games? And I answer, no, you don't have to. Games-based learning is not a monolith. It doesn't need to replace exactly everything that you're doing right now. You can use it in concert with how you're teaching right now, or whatever other training program you're running, because games-based learning can be modular. You can just use a game for a particular section. You can gamify an entire course. Really, by prioritizing a specific learning outcome and then selecting the appropriate game, you can most adequately use games-based learning. And then specifically afterwards, you want to make sure that whatever game you choose to reach that specific learning outcome is well aligned for that outcome. So one of the examples I used before is like in a simulation. If you're using a flight simulator, you want that simulator to be as realistic as possible to how that student would interact with an aircraft in the real world. What you don't want are options in that simulator that allow the student to choose like different color options or anything else. Because while that might be an interesting choice in the game, it does not help that particular student reach that specific outcome, because the outcome you're targeting is not the aesthetics of the plane. Rather, the outcome you're targeting is the student's appropriate and operational use of that aircraft. So that's what I like to say there, in aligning that specific game to that specific outcome. And then the last part I want to cover here is game-based learning is structured learning. I could go on a whole other presentation about this, but I will not. I did record an episode about structuring gamified learning. It is a podcast episode. If you'd like a direct link to that episode right now, all you have to do again is take your mobile phone, open up the camera app, and just point it at that QR code you see there on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. On games-based learning, a structured learning. It's a podcast episode I recorded. It will go more in depth into this individual area that I don't really have time to address in this individual presentation. However, if you'd like to learn more about gamified learning and structured learning, I highly suggest you listen to this episode. All right, so in this first section, we covered what is games-based learning in these four areas: games-based learning defined, choosing the right games, exactly how game-based learning works, and then game-based learning as structured learning. All right, so back to our content overview. We just covered section number 1, which is what is game-based learning. Up next, we're going to talk about our very first game, which is one called Just One, which is one I've used in the classroom before. But before we do that, I'm going to take a moment to just check the chat and check in with Sebastian to see if there's any questions that we can answer right now. Sebastian?
We have no questions at the moment, Dave, so you could just press on.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sebastian. Again, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat. There's a specific format that Sebastian has outlined there that we would like to take your questions in. I will take brief pauses after each individual section to answer those questions, then we'll move on. And again, if you would like to download a summary of this presentation as just a Word document, a simplified Word document, the link in the lower left-hand corner there of the screen and at the lower left-hand corner of all the slides, it's bit.ly/ttggwu. All right, back to our content overview here. We just talked about what is game-based learning. Now let's jump into our very first game, which is called Just One. So this is the game I'm talking about, Just One. It's a tabletop game. It's one of my favorite tabletop games, and it's one of the easiest to play. The reason I'm starting off with Just One is that as we go along with this presentation, I'm going to introduce more and more complicated games, quote unquote complicated, that are more complicated to implement and teach in an online virtual environment. So I'm going to start out with the most easy one to implement, and then we're going to go into much harder ones to implement. So I want to talk about Just One in this section here. So currently, as of this recording, there are 2 websites that you can play Just One online right now. One of them is oneword.games, and the other one is coofitness.club/awordplease. If you want, you can write down these websites right now. However, they will be included in the summary that you can again download it using that link in the lower left-hand corner of this slide and all the other slides. So these are 2 websites that you can play this game online right now. Right, so what is Just One? So Just One is a cooperative party game. And what that means is that all players are trying to play together to accomplish an objective in the game. And it's a party game because this is not really a very deep strategic game. This is more about the individual player's experience more than anything else. So in this cooperative game, all the players are going to be playing together in order to achieve the best score. So together, all the players are going to be working together, except for the active player, to guess a mystery word. And they do this by secretly writing a clue using a dry erase marker on an easel. So that's basically how the game plays in the core loop of this game. So in Just One, this is what you would do. There's going to be one player that is going to be the active player. Everyone else is going to try to help that player guess the individual word. You're going to choose a clue if you're not the active player without coordinating with the other players around the table. And you're going to write that clue on your whiteboard. And when you do that, you want to write a clue that is as original as possible. The reason is that if you write a clue that is the same word or similar word to another player, both of those clues cancel out, and the active player will not have the benefit of seeing those clues. And if you're a little confused right now, it's okay. I'm going to explain this in a little bit more depth. So in Just One, you're going to have a big pile of all of these cards, and all of these cards have exactly 5 words in them. So as the active player, usually you'll pick up one of these cards, and then you will show this card to everyone else around the table, people who are not the active player, and then you're just going to say a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Depending on the number you say, that is going to be the word that your other teammates are going to try to get you to guess. So in this case, let us choose a specific word. Just One, at the end of the game, you're going to tally your score based on the number of mystery words that you found. So after I've selected a word, I'm going to take my turn. The rest of my teammates are going to help me guess. And then afterwards, we're going to go around. So at the end, we're just going to tally up exactly how many words we're able to guess. And that's going to be our end game score. So in the game overview, it plays out in a succession of turns, and that ends at a specific number of rounds. So depending on how you want to play, you can play just a specific number of cards or race to a specific number of cards, anything else. Just One is very, very flexible because it allows you to play for as long as you like or as short as you like. And that's what I really like about it. So each turn is going to be divided into 4 phases, which we'll go through right now. So as the active player, we are going to choose that mystery word. Then all of the other players are going to actively select their clue. They're going to write their clue on their whiteboards. Then all of those players are going to compare those clues. Again, if I'm the active player, I will not be able to see these clues at all. And then afterwards, all of those players are going to share their clues with me. I'm going to look at those individual clues, and then I'm going to try to guess the word that is on that card. So when you choose the mystery word, the active player is going to draw that random mystery word. So I'm going to draw a card. I'm going to indicate the number in that card. And then all the players are going to be able to see this mystery word, but the active player cannot see that word. So again, I'm holding up the card in front of me. All I know is that there are 5 words on it. I don't know what those words are. I'm going to select a number and then show that card to my teammates and then indicate that number. And that's going to be the word that they're going to try to get me to guess. So let's go back to our card here. So this is the card I'm holding up. I cannot see it. All my teammates can see it right now. So I'm going to select number 5, so stone. So that's the word that my teammates are going to try to get me to guess by writing just one word clues on their individual whiteboards. So let's talk about clue selection. So without communicating with each other, each player is going to then type, if you're playing online, or just write on their whiteboard, one word clue. So again, the game is called Just One, so you can only write one word. So again, that clue can only be composed of a single word. I've had a lot of students that ask me, can they hyphenate a bunch of words? Can they string a bunch of words together? If you have to ask, you probably can't use that word. Again, the rule is just one. That's also the name of the game. You can only use one word as a clue. So let's go back to my card. So the word I'm trying to guess right now is stone. I'm trying to guess stone, and my teammates are going to try to help me. So with stone, let's say I write the clue rocks, or one of my teammates writes the clue rocks. Okay, that works. That's a pretty good clue. Now we're going to compare clues with each other. So remember what I said before, all identical or invalid clues are going to be canceled. So an example of an invalid clue is if the word is stone, I cannot write stone as a clue. That is not valid. I also can't write a compound word that also includes stone. So that's not going to be valid. When you're playing online, all invalid clues are going to be removed automatically. However, if you're playing in person, you're going to have to look through all of them and then erase any clues that are duplicated with anyone else. All right, so let's assume we're playing a 5-player game. So I am the active player. I need to guess this individual word based on the clues that my teammates are going to give me. So right now, I cannot see everyone else writing their clues. So everyone writes their clues. They all reveal to each other simultaneously. And these are all the clues that they write. So they write rocks, granite, pebbles, and rocks. So what you can see here is that rocks is a clue that's repeated. So these 2 clues are going to cancel each other out. I will not be able to see that clue rocks. What I will be able to see are these 2 clues, granite and pebbles. And then now you can see my dilemma. I have to guess the word stone using only these 2 clues that I can see now, pebbles and granite. So when you are comparing clues, you're going to remove all those identical clues. So identical words are mouse and mouse are identical because it's the same exact word. Also, variants of the same word are also going to be removed. So if you write ball and another person writes balls, then those 2 clues are going to cancel it out because they are the same word, just one is a plural version of the other one. All right, so once all the identical or invalid clues have been canceled, we ask the active player, me, to try to guess the mystery word with the help of the remaining clues. Remember, 2 people wrote the same word, rock, so those clues cancel each other out. And then to do this, me, as the active player, I'm only allowed 1 guess. Remember, the name of the game is called Just One. Just 1 word for me to guess, just 1 word for a clue, and I only have 1 guess in order to get it right. So let's see, the 2 clues that I was able to see because rocks cancel each other out are pebbles and granite. So like it comes to me, I think about it for a while, and then I try to write my individual answer. So in the result, the success, if me as the active player, I guess correctly, then I get that is a positive point. That is a word in our win pile. And if it's a failure, the active player makes a wrong guess. So if I guess any other word but the actual word, then it's going to go in our fail pile and it will count against this. So let's go back to my individual clues here. So I have pebbles and I have granite. Based off of that, I would write stone. And if I wrote stone, I would get it. Yay, that card now goes in our positive pile. However, if I were to write anything else like bedrock, that would be incorrect because that was not the word I'm trying to guess. It would go into our negative points pile. All right, so at the end of the turn, it's very simple. The next player becomes the new active player, so turns pass to the left, and then a new turn begins, and we continue playing the game from there. So the end of the game occurs, again, according to the rules, after a specified number of rounds. Depending on the number of people that are playing, you can have 1 full orbit around the table. You can do 2 full orbits. For me, I tend not to play in a very structured environment. So for me, I just like to play until we don't want to play this game anymore. So we take an infinite amount of turns and we just really have fun in this individual environment of trying to guess these individual words. All right, so I talked about learning outcomes at the very beginning of this, specifically as it relates to game-based learning. How can you use just one in a teaching, training, and learning environment? Well, one of the outcomes I like using is the granularity in speech and communications. One of the most interesting parts about just one is that you want to give clues that will allow the active player to guess the word. However, you cannot give really obvious clues because if you do, you probably will cancel out with someone else around the table. So when you first start playing, you try to give more like esoteric clues or anything else. However, if enough players at the table do that, no one really writes obvious clues. So you can see how there's kind of a spectrum of what you should write and when you should write it. So what's interesting here is that you have a lot of granular focus and control over how you communicate individual concepts and ideas using this restriction of using just one word. The other thing is challenging preconceived notions, and I get asked this a lot whenever I use just one in the classroom, and it's because I like just one because individual words have different individual meanings for people. There is a denotation and a connotation for each word, and what's really interesting about using just one in a classroom and teaching environment is that we get to see these other subjective interpretations of these words because just one is a party game, it is a word game, but it's also a people game. It's trying to understand the word associations or how you would communicate an idea or concept to someone you may know pretty well and how to do it as succinctly as possible, which I think is a great learning outcome here. And the last one is just creative thinking and empathy. So you may, again, be trying to communicate an individual thing to an individual person who is it as the active player, but you also have to think from their position. You have to demonstrate empathy in this role, in that you cannot just give them obvious clues because you'll probably cancel out with other players, but you also have to think about how that player would interpret each of those individual clues. So the better you happen to know the players in your group, the better you happen to know your classmates, the better communicator you will be whenever you play just one. All right, so like I said before, here are the 2 websites that you can play just one for free online. I want to point that out. All these games that I'm going to be talking about tonight, you have to purchase the tabletop version. However, you want to play online, all these websites, as of this recording, are free to use. The website that I like to use to play just one online is this one, oneword.games, and I'm going to go through exactly what this interface looks like. So when you go to the website, you'll get this welcome screen here. All you can do is write in your player name, and once you do that, it is going to create a room for you. And when you're in this room, you're going to wait for some players to join you. When you create that room, you can then send out this link directly to your students. Whenever I've done this, I've done it over Zoom, so I just paste that link directly in the chat there. And when you are in the web interface, there are a couple of things that you can do here as the moderator. So you can select here to go to the next stage, to skip a word, or to reset the room. Sometimes if the word is too hard, or if the active player just doesn't know it, you should skip it or just go on to the next stage in order to move the game forward. In addition, you as a moderator, you can transfer your responsibilities as a moderator to another person, or you can kick out individual people in your group. But again, every time I've run this, it's with my students that I happen to know already, so I haven't really had to use these individual options before. Down here, you also have the option of implementing a clue timer. So you don't want the game to last too long. You can make a clue timer, meaning that everyone will have 60 seconds to write a clue, or 30 seconds, or 90 seconds, or anything else like that. And then likewise, you can also have a guess timer. So the person who is the active player, it'll limit the amount of time that it'll take them to guess that individual word. And then down here, depending on who you're playing with and how difficult you want this to be, you can limit the kinds of words that come up randomly. So the default is nouns, but you can also include verbs, adjectives, compound words, or a custom list of words. I've seen some instructors and some professors and teachers use a custom list of words if they're specifically teaching with a vocabulary learning outcome in mind. This is a really, really great way to teach that specific vocabulary learning outcome because you can upload your own list of words directly to the website. And then this is where you can upload that direct list here. All you have to do is cut and paste it directly into this box here below. All right, so that was just one. That's one of the 4 games that we will be covering tonight. Going back to our content overview, we've talked about what is games-based learning. We just talked about just one. Up next, we'll talk about the next game, which is called Hanabi. But before we do that, I'm going to take a break and go to the chat and ask Sebastian if there's any questions we can answer.
Actually, we do have some questions. The first question is, could you give like a 30-second summary to what structured learning is in your definition?
So when I talk about structured learning, I'm talking about if you are already teaching right now, scaffolded learning. Meaning that whenever you're using games, you have to, you kind of have to pull double duty here. Sometimes if your students are not very familiar with the game itself, most of the time that's going to happen. You're going to have to teach them how to play the game. The second part though is also connecting the specific learning outcome that you're targeting with your students with the game that you're playing. Sometimes I like to make that very obvious and transparent at the very beginning. Like, we're playing this game because of X, Y, and Z. I want you to learn this. Here's the learning outcome. We're playing the game because you have this. However, other times, like whenever I've used Hanabi, which is the next game we'll talk about, I don't indicate those learning outcomes at the very beginning. I just say, this class is about this. I'm going to teach you how to play this game Hanabi. This is how the game plays. Play the game. And then afterwards, through the debrief, through our talk about that individual game, that is when we really identify why I've selected this game. And usually I ask them, why do you think I've selected this game for us to play? So that is a very brief overview on what I mean by structured learning. It's more of like scaffolded learning. Most instructors and teachers and professors do that right now. But when you're using game-based learning, you always also want to remember that you need to take that scaffolded and structured approach.
So a quick technical question is, how many players can you use for just one on the online version?
For the online version, I believe it is capped at 12 players. In person, I bought 2 copies of the game, and I've played it with 12 people before. So I believe that, yeah, in both versions, I've maxed out at 12 people in person, and I believe online you can also cap out at 12. If you happen to have more than 12 students in your class you want to run this for, I recommend hosting breakout rooms in Zoom and then appointing one of your other students to be a moderator of one of the other groups.
Now, the next question is, when aligning participants to your learning outcomes, is there a process of analysis or any other kind of assessment that you go through, like survey methods or similar methods to match participants to a particular learning outcome, or vice versa?
I don't have a specific process, I would say. I'd say like the most basic thing I do is I look at my own syllabus or the syllabus for the class I've been asked to teach, and I determine, like, what are the course learning outcomes for this individual class, and then based on that, based on the content or whatever course map they want me to follow, I attempt to select some games that I think will help help address some of those learning outcomes. And to be honest with you, sometimes I can find really great matches between games I know how to play and I think the outcomes for that class. But other times, I really can't think of any games that I think would help those individual outcomes. So I think that it's an important question to ask, definitely. The process in which you answer it, though, is highly nuanced. And I don't know if I can provide a really general overview, but what I've done in the past is I look at the syllabus, I look at the course learning outcomes, and then I try to determine if any games I know would best fit those outcomes.
So as a follow-on question, what other contexts, or can you give us more examples of how you have used just one in whatever context, in terms of classrooms or other learning objectives you sought to use for just one?
Oh, sure. So one of the most salient examples is I used to teach a undergraduate public speaking class, and this was for traditional age for first-year freshman students. And this was a public speaking class that was part of a gen ed requirement for communication. And part of the reason why I wanted to use just one is the fact that I wanted to target the outcome that brevity in conversation can be very difficult, particularly when you're speaking to an audience. So I used just one as an opener for one of our first classes because I wanted to tell them that in some instances, you will be able to have the full range of communication options available to you. But when you are public speaking, you need to be very, very careful about how you communicate with your audience. Now I want to play this game called Just One, because in the game Just One, you are going to be tasked with communicating a specific amount of information to your audience or to the active player using these very strict structures. And that's how I introduced it there. Just One wasn't the only game we played in the class, but it was one of the first games we played. So that's one of the applications that I've used Just One in an educational environment.
So I have another question pop in, and then we can move on. Is
Mhm.
have you used Zendo for teaching? It has similar elements to just one. Only instead of guessing words, you guess a hidden rule governing how objects like a plastic pyramid piece relate to each other. I've used it for teaching research method concepts, but I'm curious if you've used it and for what purposes.
No, I've never actually heard of Zendo before, but that sounds like a really great application. So I'm gonna have to hopefully, Sebastian, I can save the chat after this because I'd like to check out that site.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. So I'll post a link to Zendo unless Amanda wants to beat me to it.
Okay.
Otherwise, Dave, you can press on.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. All right, so back to our content overview. So far we've talked about what is game-based learning. We just covered the first game, just one. Now we're going to cover a new game called Hanabi, which is pretty near and dear to my heart because it's one of the first modern tabletop games I picked up, and it's one of the games that I studied specifically for my doctoral research on games-based learning. Okay, so what exactly is Hanabi? Here's a picture of it right here. If you have played this game or you're looking for it online, there are several different versions of it. The version that I have and the one that I studied specifically is this card game version, which is very inexpensive. It's a very small game. There is also another version that you can buy a physical copy of that actually has like tiles. It looks like mahjong tiles. I happen to have both because I like the game that much. You don't have to get one or the other. If you are tight on budget, I recommend getting this physical one if you'd like to play the game physically. However, like all the other games we're talking about tonight, there is a website or websites in which you can play Hanabi online. So here are the two websites that I recommend playing Hanabi online. There's Hanab, HANAB.live. And if you are also playing right now on Board Game Arena, you can play Hanabi on Board Game Arena. That's available there. All right, so let's jump off right here. So what exactly is Hanabi? So Hanabi, it's another cooperative game, just like Just One, meaning like all the players are going to be playing together as a team. There's no active player this time. Well, I mean, there's a player who is active who's taking a turn, but it's not all players trying to get one other player to guess something. Instead, all players are going to be playing together. So the theme for Hanabi is that all the players have to play the fireworks cards and sorted by colors and numbers. So what do I mean by that? So in this game is going to be a series of cards which represent different fireworks, and those fireworks also represent different heights in which you launch them. So numbers 1 through 5. So again, talking more about the theme for this game. So in this case, all of the players in Hanabi are playing absent-minded firework manufacturers who accidentally mixed up all the powders and fuses and rockets for this firework display. So the show is about to start. This show. And you, as the fireworks manufacturers, you have to organize all of these fireworks by color and number. So you now all have to work together in order to stop the show from becoming a disaster. So you all, again, are the pyrotechnicians who need to put this display together. So there are going to be 5 different types of fireworks that are separated into 5 different colors. And those colors are white, red, blue, yellow, and green. And then all of these individual colors are going to be rising in number, starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So there are 5 fireworks, 5 different colors, and 5 different numbers for each one of them. So this is what a full display of Hanabi looks like. You'll see the blue, green, red, white, and yellow fireworks displays all going in ascending order all the way to the top, ending with the 5th firework here at the bottom. And you'll see that they all have to go in ascending order. So before you can play the 2, you have to play the 1 red before you can play the 2 red on top of it. Okay, so overall, you're organizing cards. Not very difficult. So here's the crux of the game. This is what makes it a little bit difficult. You, as an individual player, you're going to have a series of cards in your hand, but you cannot see the face of your card. You can only see the back of them. The rest of your players, only they can see the face of your card. So only they have full information. You do not have information about the cards in your hand. However, you have full information about everyone else's cards in their hand. So the more cards the players play correctly, the more options that you have to receive when the points that you receive when the game ends. So you want to play as many firework cards as correctly as possible in order to score the highest score at the very end of the game, or at least not lose the game. So this is what that fireworks display looks like again. This is the yellow fireworks display completed, starting with the yellow 1, going all the way up to the yellow 5 here at the end. So it's really, really important. And I tell people this, and whenever I've used this in a teaching environment, players cannot look at the cards which are dealt to them. So this is a very hard thing to get over if you're playing in a physical environment, which is when you get dealt a hand of cards, you immediately want to pick them up and look at them. But no, in Hanabi, you get dealt a hand of cards, you cannot look at it. If you're playing online, it makes it very easy because you cannot look at your own hand of cards. But again, if you're playing in person, do not look at your hand of cards. You cannot look at them. You can look at everyone else's hand instead. So this is what your hand of cards should look like to you if you're playing the physical game. You only know that you have 5 cards and you have the backs of these cards right here. So when you're playing Hanabi, you will have a few options when it is your turn. So one of the options you can take is to give another player a piece of information. So in order to carry out this task, you as the active player, the person whose turn it is, you're going to use up a clue token. And then when you use up that clue token, you can tell a teammate something about the cards in their hands. So the clue tokens for the game, the physical game, they don't look like this in the digital one, are these. These are these clock symbols right here. So you'll have a supply of these. And in order to give a clue to a teammate, you're going to have to use up one of these individual clue tokens. So let's say this is my hand again, or this is the hand of a player around the table. They cannot see what their hand is. And let's say that I want to give clues about these 2 cards right here. So when you give a piece of information, there are 2 types of information you can give to another player. Let's cover one of them. So one is you can give information about a color and only one color when you're playing Hanabi. So an example is you have a red card here, or you have 2 green cards here and here, or you have 2 black cards here, here, and here, or whatever combination of color cards there are. So let's go back to this hand again for this individual player. So this is us. This is what we can see. The player we're giving clues to, they cannot see these cards. So let's select these 2 right here. So we see on the end, there's a blue 4 and a blue 3, and we want to target those cards and give them information. So playing in person, we would tap these 2 cards as they're holding them, and we'd say, okay, these 2 cards I'm tapping right here, these cards are blue. And just tell them that. That's all the clue we can give them. We've chosen the color, and we can just say that these cards are blue, and that's it. So the other piece of information you can give a player is information about the value of cards that all meet that same value requirement. So an example here is that you have a card of, you have a 5 here and a 5 here, or you have 2 cards of value 1 here and here, or you have 2 cards with value 4 there and there. So again, you're going to indicate to them one of 2 clues. First clue could be a color, and the other clue could be a number. So let's go back to that hand of cards again. So this is what your teammate sees. Again, they cannot see their hand of cards, and we want to give them clues about these 2 cards right here. So the ones that you see on screen mean that these 2 cards are 3s. So we can turn to our teammate again and say like, hey, these 2 cards we're tapping right here, these 2 individual cards, these 2 cards are 3s. That's the only clue we can give them. So in this case, one person can choose to give them a color clue. Another person down the line can choose to give them a number clue. So those are the 2 types of information that can be given. So this is important to note. The player must give complete information. It has to be complete. This means that if a player has 2 green cards, then you as the active player, you cannot only tell them that only one of those cards are green. If you choose to give a color as a clue, you have to indicate all the colors in their hand that are cards in their hand that are that color. Likewise, if you choose a number, you have to tell them all the cards in their hand that are that number. So in this case, given those 2 clues, we have used deductive reasoning to determine that this card here on the end is a blue 3. So we're going to store that up in our head and just remember that that card is a blue 3. And that we know that this other card here is blue, but we still don't know what the numerical value of that is yet. So when you give a piece of information, this action cannot be performed if there are no more clue tokens. So those clue tokens are going to be limited. Once all of those clue tokens are used up, you cannot give out any more information. And then that player needs to perform a different action. So these again are the clue tokens here. Once those are all used up, you cannot give any more clues to other teammates. So how do you get those clue tokens back? There's a couple different ways. Number one is you can discard a card. So this allows the player to earn another clue token back into the common pile that other teammates can use. So this means that a player is going to take a card from their hand. They're going to discard it, face up. They're going to put it in the discard pile. And then that player is going to then take a new card from the draw pile and then adds it to their hand without looking at it. So you're going to select the card from your hand. You may not need it anymore based on what your teammates have told you. You're going to put it in the discard pile. You're going to put a clue token back in the common supply. And then you're going to draw back up from the deck a new card. So when you discard a card, this action can only be performed if all the clue tokens are available. Or this action cannot be performed if all the clue tokens are available, meaning that if all the clue tokens are already out, you cannot discard a card to get any more back because there's none, all of them are available right now. So the player is going to need to perform another action if that happens to be the case. So again, here are the clue tokens. They look like for the physical copy of the game. For the digital copy, it's just a numerical counter that tells you how many clue tokens are available. All right, so the other action you can take when it's your turn is to play a card. So when you play a card, the active player is going to take a card from their hand, and then they're going to place it face up in front of them. And then based on the value of the card and also the color of the card, there are going to be two results that are possible. So the card either begins or completes a firework, and then it is added to that firework display. So in this case here, for this column, if someone put down that white 1, and I put down the white 2, it's going to go on top of that white 1, and it's going to build up that firework display all the way up to number 5. Or the other option is that the card does not complete any firework display, then it is discarded and a red token is added. So an area where that could happen is, say I chose to play a white 2, but the white 1 is not out yet, then that is not the correct card. I discard that card and then I pick up one of those red tokens, and those red tokens indicate how many mistakes you can make before the game ends. Because if you use up all of those red tokens, then the game will be over. If this happens, the player is just going to discard that card, take a new card from the draw pile, add it to their hand, again, without looking at it. So these are those red tokens. These are supposed to represent the fuse on the fireworks. So if you use up all 4 of the fuse tokens, you have failed in your fireworks display and everyone loses because, again, it is a cooperative game. All right, so how are the fireworks made up? So here are the rules here. So there can only be one firework of each color. Once a white 1 has been played, you cannot play any more white ones. Once a green 1 has been played, can't play any more green ones. Likewise for all the other colors going up in the display. Each display can only have one color and one number of each individual firework. And then the cards for that firework display have to be placed again in rising order, starting with 1 and finally ending at 5. And then it can only be one card of each value firework. So that means that for the 5 fireworks, for numbers 1 through 5, there can only be a total of 25 cards in a completed display of fireworks. So again, here display here for that green pile of 1, that firework display has been completed. We've started with the green 1 and we've gone all the way up to the green 5 to complete that display. So at the end of the game, there are 3 ways that you can end the game of Hanabi. So 1, the game will end immediately and is lost if the 4th explosion has been triggered. So again, here are those fuse tokens. So if you have to draw the 4th one and you have no more fuse tokens left, you've lost the game because all of your fireworks have exploded in your face. The other end of the game can occur immediately if the firework makers manage to make the 5 fireworks before the cards run out. So this would be a perfect game. If you can make all 5 firework displays, all 5 colors, numbers 1 through 5, before the deck runs out, then you've won and you've scored a perfect game. And then the game can end if the firework maker takes the last card from the pile. So if there are no more cards in the draw pile, if you have to draw a card and you take the last card from the draw pile, the game is ended and you will count your score. You will try to resolve your score as it stands right there. Okay, so let's talk about learning outcomes here. So Hanabi, unlike just one, is a much more, I would say, objective, logistical, deductive game. And that's why I like to target this specific learning outcome here, which is deductive reasoning. Because it is not overly complex, based on the kind of clues that you are given by your teammates, you can use deductive reasoning in order to determine what cards are left in your hand. If someone tells you a single card you're holding is blue and another person tells you that that card is a 3, you now know it's a blue 3. It's not overly complex, but something I like to focus on when I'm really targeting deductive reasoning as a learning outcome. The other one is teamwork and cooperation. This game is like one of my favorite to play as a teamwork building game, and I've used this more in a professional or I'd say like team building setting than I would say in a curricular like higher ed setting, because it's just so good at that. People need to convey this information to other teammates, but they also need them to pay attention and use their own deductive reasoning in order to determine what cards they need to play and when. And that's what I really, really like about this game overall, and why I continue to use it. And the last part is about discussion and consensus building. So if you happen to be teaching a class on teamwork or cooperation or group dynamics, this is great because you can play Hanabi several times and appoint one person from the group to be the team leader or the consensus builder or anything else. Because again, you are all working together. Not everyone has all of the information. So really focusing and targeting one person to be that person that builds consensus, probably even if it's a quiet student that you feel like has a lot of potential, you can identify them as that person that you want to build consensus and really put them in that role that they should fulfill while playing the game. All right, so here again are those two websites that you can rely on to play Hanabi online. I like to use this one right up here. So the website is hanab.live, L-I-V-E. And let's take a walkthrough of what this looks like. So when you go to the website here, you'll be greeted with this screen, Hanab Live. You'll need to create an account for this one. The Just One website, you did not need to create an account. You just have to indicate your name. For this website, you'll need to create an account. Once you log in, there you have several options up here on the menu bar. So the first thing you want to do is just hit here, Create Game. And when you create a game, you're going to be provided with some game information. So it's going to come up with some crazy name to name your game. This is going to be randomly generated so that the game will be unique. And then this is what that game window looks like whenever you're playing online. So a couple different things I want to point out in this screenshot right here. So right here, this represents your fireworks display. So like I said before, you have 5 different fireworks. And this display here just shows you that we don't have any purple fireworks yet. We don't have any red fireworks. We're on level 2 with yellow, level 2 with green, and level 1 with blue. So unlike the physical game where you would be able to show the numbers underneath, here they just stack all the cards directly on top of each other. Over here, in the lower left-hand corner, this tells you what turn you're on and then your score. Remember, here it says score 5 out of 25. 25 would be a perfect game. And then also the number of clue tokens you have left in order to give. And then up here, this is what your hand of cards look like. So what I really like about the online version is this. So you can see that card all the way to the right, it says 5 red. And that's because based on the information that my teammates have given me, it's done some deductive reasoning for me on my part. Based on the information, I know that it's a red card first, and it was a 5, so I know that it's a red 5. This is really, I would say, some of the misgivings of running this game online, which is why I prefer to run it in person if possible. But when you're running the online version, this will use that deductive reasoning for you in order to identify those cards. And then down here, these are your teammates. So this is what you can see of their cards. Again, you cannot see your hand, but you can see all of the information for the rest of your teammates in their cards in their hands. So when you give a clue, this is what it'll look like. So say I want to give this player a clue here, and I've selected these 2 cards. I've selected a number over a color, and it indicates that these 2 cards are 5s, and it has the 5 number over them, and then I'll be asked to confirm. And once I do that, it will send that player that clue and also mark it on their dashboard that that clue that they got means that these 2 cards that I've indicated are the number 5. All right, so that's Hanabi. It's a game that I've used extensively in the past. I really like it. The online version, I would say, is not as great as the in-person version. However, if you don't really have the option to play online, then the online, in-person, I should say, the online version is a great game to play. All right, so far we've covered what is game-based learning in just one, and we just recently finished talking about Hanabi. Up next, we're going to be playing another classic, new modern classic tabletop game called Codenames. But before we go there, I'm just going to take a break here and check the chat. So Sebastian, any questions we can answer?
No particular questions, but there's a great discussion happening in the chat about using games that are unexpected, like the ones you mentioned, like Just One and Hanabi, to apply to teach a wide variety of topics and ideas. So I think you really sparked a really interesting idea about this. And
oh man, I feel sad that I'm missing out on this great conversation in the chat now.
No worries, I'll fill you in.
Okay.
And one of the things, like for example, Mike Dunn mentioned about using Hanabi to think about and explore the notion of signaling, but also, like you said, deductive reasoning. And also, I think it's fantastic. So one quick question. You can't write any of this knowledge down, can you? Do you just have to keep it in your head?
You have to keep it in your head. I have played with younger players. I would say like my younger cousins, where I've actually developed like physical clue tokens so that they can put it next to their card. Like this card is blue, this card is a 5, because it's, you know, like memory, it may be harder for them. You don't have to do that. I think the game is better without it, but you can use it with your students if you think it's worthwhile.
No, actually, that was one of the aspects I really liked about it for adult learners, to think about keeping a wide range of information and pieces coming towards you in your head and sort of organized, right?
Yeah.
I think that's particularly a very useful skill for, I work with mostly military officers. So, I mean, intelligence is never perfect, and you have to keep all this sort of information and sort of puzzle it together, which I think is very important. Amanda, who mentioned Zendo before, she mentioned that she would love a sort of workshop of like exploring all these types of games that people have used and played, and discussing ways how they can be applied to a classroom setting, whether that be for professional military education, or like you said, for different learners for different contexts. And I think that's a great idea for a future Goose webinar / workshop. But otherwise,
Nice.
I don't think we have any questions that I see right now. But so you can press on, Dave.
All right. Thank you, Sebastian. All right, so let's go back to our content overview. So again, in this presentation, we talked about what is game-based learning. We covered just one party game, covered Hanabi, deductive reasoning. Now let's talk about Codenames. If you're familiar with any of the modern tabletop games, you're probably already familiar with Codenames, but if you're not, I'm going to go through a quick example of what this is. So here is the physical version of Codenames that is available right here. You can purchase it in any online major retailer. It's quite ubiquitous. It's available in many different places, everything from Amazon to Target to Walmart or anything else. So it's very, very easy to get a copy. Because of that, there are many, many places where you can play Codenames for free online. I'm going to go through my favorite website in order to use it, which doesn't happen to be the official website, but I like the interface best there, and I will walk you through exactly how I use it there. But prior to talking about the online version, let's talk about the physical version and how you play this in person. So Codenames is a game, again, based on teams, but in this case, there are going to be two separate teams. There's going to be a red team and a blue team. On each individual team, there's going to be one person that takes on the role of the spy master. And as the spy master, you are trying to give individual clues to the rest of your team to try to guess individual words that are on the Codenames board. So the individual code names on the board are going to be those, what we call 25 different agents. So your teammates only know their agents by their code names, which are the actual names on those cards directly on the board. However, you as the spy master, you know which one of those agents are on your team, blue team or red team, and which one of those agents are on the other team. So spy masters during a game of Codenames are going to take turns giving one-word clues to one or multiple different cards on the table. Again, those cards represent agents that you're trying to get your teammates to guess. So here's an example of what a setup looks like for a Codenames board. So this is what it's going to look like in person, and then depending on the website you use, this is what it'll also look like online. It's 25 different words available on the board here, so a 5x5 grid. And then as a spy master, only the spy masters for each team, again, the red team and the blue team, are going to have this key. So this key here indicates on your board which one of those cards are for the blue team, which one of those cards are for the red team, which one of those cards are bystanders, which we'll talk about, and which one of those cards is the assassin. So in this case, if I'm on the red team, I know that these individual cards here, these are the agents that represent the red team. So these are the cards I'm going to try to get my teammates to guess. Likewise, the blue spy master is trying to get these cards guessed by their individual teammates, because these cards represent the blue team's agents. So they are trying to get their team to guess the blue team agents. I'm trying to get my teammates to guess the red team agents. And this is what the board looks like for us. So we're trying to give out clues that'll get individual players to guess these individual cards on the board. So in Codenames, one person on your team is going to be the spy master. Everyone else on your team are going to be called field operatives. So those field operatives are going to try to guess the words that the spy master meant when they gave them that individual clue. So when a field operative selects a word, that spy master is then going to reveal its identity. When you're playing in person, you would put a card on top of that word. When you're playing online, all of this is just done automatically, which I'll talk about later on. So this is what a physical setup of Codenames looks like. And you can see here on this board, some red team agents have been identified, some blue team agents have been identified. These are what they look like. You would put this card you would put an individual agent on top of that card that represents your color, red for red and blue for blue. So in Codenames, when those field operatives guess correctly, they can also continue guessing cards on the board until they run out of ideas for the given clue, or until they hit the wrong person. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that wrong person could be like in some of the future slides here. Then afterwards, the other team is going to have a turn to be able to give a clue and guess. And then the game ends when one team is able to contact all of their agents. And once they do that, they win the game. So in this case here, this blue team agent has been able to say one of their blue agents on this card here, and they are now in the process of placing their blue agent cards on top of these cards right here. All right, so if you're a spy master, you're gonna have to go over how to give a clue to your teammates, your field operatives. So as a spy master, you're again, like just one, you're trying to think of a one-word clue that relates to some of the words your team is trying to guess. And then when you think of a good clue, all you have to do is say it. And this is how you format that clue. When you say your clue, you're also going to say a number after that single word. So the number, it tells your field operatives, your teammates, how many code names, how many cards on the board relate to that individual clue. So for example, if the words you're trying to get your teammates to guess, your field operatives, are nut and bark, both of these things grow on trees. So one of the options you have is to say, give the clue tree, and then say 2. Tree is the clue you're giving, and 2 is the number of cards on the board that that clue relates to. So let's look at our board again. So here, playing as the red team as the spy master, we are trying to get our teammates to guess these cards that you see here on screen. So we are going to have to try to get them to guess these cards over the course of the game. But for this first turn, let's just really concentrate on these cards. So the cards we're trying to get our teammates to guess are point and strike. So now let's try to think of a good clue for that. So let's say we say stab 2. Stab 2. So me as the spy master, that's how I'm going to indicate it. The clue is stab, and the number of cards that it relates to is 2. And again, I'm relating to these 2 cards here. I'm thinking about them, and I'm trying to get my field operatives, my teammates, to guess them. So just like just one, the only clue you can give, it can only be one word. No, you can't make compound words, you can't hyphenate a bunch of words together. You're again limited to just one word. And then also afterwards, you're not allowed to give any extra hints. So you can't look at the board a specific way. You can't use any body language. You're only limited to the word, the one word clue, and the number of cards that it relates to. So for example, and this happens a lot in games of Codenames, you may say like, this is a bit of a stretch, but tree 2. Whenever you're playing Codenames, everything is a bit of a stretch. So again, you're highly limited here to just saying your one word clue and then the number of cards that it relates to. All right, so after you do that, your field operatives, the rest of the people on your team, they're gonna have to try to make contact. So after the spy master gives their clue, the other people on the team, the field operatives, gotta try to figure out what that means. So the nice part about this is that the field operatives, your other teammates, they can debate it amongst themselves. But the spy master, you have to keep a straight face. You cannot give out any more information. It's really up to your teammate to try to guess those cards. So afterwards, when you make contact as a field operative, you're going to indicate your official guest when you physically touch one of the cards on the board. When you're playing online, it's just going to be able. So if the field operative touches the card belonging to their team, your spy master is going to then take a agent of that color and put it over that card. So let's go back to our board here. So again, the clue I gave out was stab 2. Let's say that one of my field operatives decided to touch this card right here, strike. Well, that's one of the words that I was trying to get them to guess, so I put down one of the red agent cards on top of it. Okay, so after they do that, they then get another guess, but not another clue. So again, remember what I said. I said stab 2. Stab is the clue, and 2 is the number of cards that it relates to. So operatives can continue to guess, but I will not give them another clue. So in this case, if a field operative, the other people on your team, if they touch an innocent bystander, then the spy master is going to cover it with an innocent bystander card, and that means your turn ends. So innocent bystanders in this case look like this. So let's say that my teammate chose to tap club over here, and they do that. I put down this innocent bystander card because it did not belong to my team. It did not belong to the other team. So this is a neutral card, an innocent bystander. And once they do that, the turn is over. So if the field operative happens to touch a card belonging to the other team, then the other team will take one of their cards and put it on top of their card. So in this case, it would be a blue team, blue agent card. And in that case, your turn is going to be over, and you've also inadvertently helped the other team. So let's go back to our board here. So let's say that one of my teammates decided to touch this word here, crane. So when they touch crane, we find out that it's a blue team agent. So our turn is going to be over, and we've actually helped the other team. So not a good move to play there. All right, and the last thing you can do is if your field operative touches one of the cards that is the assassin, then that word is going to be covered by the assassin card, and then that is going to end the game for you. Because if you contact the assassin, it is like sinking the 8-ball in pool, which means that you lose instantly. So once you've touched the assassin card, that just means that the game is over for you. That's it. So one of the tips I tell people when you're playing Codenames for the first time is to make sure that your clue does not relate to the assassin in any way, which could be easy or difficult depending on what your board looks like. So let's go to it again here. So we know on our card that this card here, so in the middle column, second from the top, this is the assassin. So in the game here, the assassin is this orange card right there. So say one of our teammates were to tap that orange card, we would put down the assassin, and then that would be game over. So red team would instantly lose because we tapped the assassin card. So let's talk about number of guesses that your teammates can take in a moment. So the field operatives must always make at least one guess. So whenever you as the spy master give a clue, your field operatives have to touch at least one card in the board in order to make that guess. So any wrong guess is going to end that turn immediately. But if your teammates as the field operatives guess a word of their team's color, you can keep guessing. So you just have to hope that you're guessing the right cards for your team and not the other not the other team's cards, not the assassin, and not any bystanders. So you can stop guessing at any time if you're a field operative, but usually you want to guess as many words as you possibly can, as the spy master had said, because sometimes you might want to guess even more. And this is particularly relevant if your team happens to be behind in the game. So there's a little bit of push your luck here. I don't know if that really relates specifically to a learning outcome, but that's something that players can do, and they have the agency in order to make that choice going into the future. So let's say that my teammates have selected this card here, strike. Strike was one of the words. Point was one of the words. They're going to keep guessing. Trip was one of our words. Again, they have the option to keep guessing. I cannot give them another clue. So let's say they selected millionaire. So millionaire was one of the blue team's words. So that means that the blue team will get their card on top of there, and then the red team's turn will be over. All right, so after that, let's talk about game flow. So spy masters are going to take turns giving clues. Red team will go, then blue team, then back to red team, back and forth and back and forth. So after the spy master gives a clue, his or her team just starts guessing. The turns go back and forth like that. So in this case, me as the spy master, and then my teammates, it could be one, it could be several group of people. They are going to be the field operatives. Me as the spy master, I'm going to give my clue. I'm going to say stab 2, and then my teammates are then going to have to think about that individual clue and try to determine what cards on the board really relate to that individual clue. All right, so your turn is going to end whenever you guess wrong, or if you've decided to stop, or when you've made the maximum number of guesses made for that clue, that individual clue that you can make. After you've done that, it's then going to be the other team's turn, and then turns are going to go back and forth until the game resolves and one player wins. So how do you end the game? So the game ends when one team has all their words covered. That team is going to win. So that's one of the most common ways that you win in a game of Codenames. It's also possible to win on the other team's turn if they happen to guess your last word, which has happened a couple times for me. Say the blue team needs just one word to guess. It's my turn as the red team, and I've tapped a card, but it happens to be the blue team's last card. They would instantly win. And then the game can end early if a field operative on any team happens to touch the card that is the assassin, in which case, whoever team that person is on, their team will lose and the other team will win. So in this case, this is what our board looks like. Let's say that the red team chooses this word nail, and after they've chosen nail, then it's going to be a red team victory because they've gotten all of their cards before the blue team has gotten all of their agent cards. All right, so let's talk about specific learning outcomes here. So Codenames is fundamentally a lot like Just One. There is more housekeeping to do in Codenames compared to Just One. Just One is very much open-ended, but it also has this great learning outcome, which is granularity in speech and communications. Just like Just One, as a spy master, you can only give one-word clues. However, in this case, it happens to be also attached to a specific number of cards that happen to be on the board. But again, you're targeting what your individual teammates are thinking about and how they could interpret that individual clue. The second thing is challenging preconceived notions. So individual students or other people on your team could have preconceived notions about words on the board. How would you interpret that as a spy master? And then also, how would you give an appropriate clue based on whatever those preconceived notions are? I haven't worked with any instructors that have done it before, but you can totally also make up your own list of words for code names, or your print it out if you want to use it for a physical version. And I don't know if the website I'm going to recommend allows you to input your own custom list, but that could be a good use of custom words for code names as well. And then again, like Just One, creative thinking and empathy. You're trying to communicate to a group of people that may or may not think just like you. And if they are divergent thinkers, you have to take that into account if you are the spy master and you're trying to give them clues, which is also why I like using code names, and I've used code names for my public speaking class in the past. All right, so here's that list again of all of those different websites that use Codenames, so you can play Codenames for free online. There is an official website to play Codenames, but the one I like to use is actually this one. It's run by NetGames. It's netgames.io/game/codewords that they use. So here's what it looks like on the website. So here is what a spy master's screen will look like. This screen here scales, so you can play it on mobile, you can play it on a desktop computer, but it identifies which words are on your team for the blue team, which words are on the red team for the red team. The black card right there, part, is the assassin, and all the other cards are going to be bystanders. So that's what that board looks like right here. When you type in your clue, you're going to write your single word down here in this text box. And then you're also going to select the number of cards that that clue relates to down here. And then after you've submitted your clue, all you have to do is hit OK, and it goes over to your teammates, your field operatives, and then they will have a chance to guess that card. This is one of the hands down easiest games to play in a Zoom environment if you happen to be teaching over Zoom. And then on the flip side, this is what the field operatives will see on their side. So they'll see which cards are on the board, which cards have already been identified for the blue team, the red team, and then the white cards happen to be active bystanders. All right, so that is Codenames. Again, one of the oldest games that I've used for teaching and learning, one of my favorites, and many, many different options for you to play it online. All right, so back to our content overview. We're almost at the end here. We've talked about what is Gamespace Learning, Just One, and Hanabi. We just finished talking about Codenames. Up next, we're going to finish off with talking about Wavelength, one of the newest games to hit the scene. But before we do that, I'm going to take a break and take a moment to check the chat. So Sebastian, any questions we can answer?
There's a simple question of, is Codenames a game includes 2 spy masters and 2 teams? I think you went over that, but just to reiterate, since the question was put in the chat.
Yeah. So Codenames minimum player count is going to be 4. So it's you and a partner versus another partner. However, I've played Codenames with as many as, even numbers is best, as many as 16 people. So 1 spy master on each side, and then 7 field operatives. Depending on your class, the discussion can get pretty out of control or heated, or it could be difficult to manage. But I've played it with that number of people, at least in a physical environment. Online, I don't know if there's a hard cap. I think it might be 10 or 12, but I'd have to double check.
So this seems to be a bit of a semantic rule. Question is it possible to use the phonetic alphabet to lead onto a word or a series of words? For example, Papa for meaning P, and for targeting 4 words beginning with P.
I will say that it is possible to use the word in the game. Is it in the best interest of the game and the learning outcomes? Sometimes not, because again, the game has a specific magic circle, which is you've agreed to play this game using these individual set of rules. However, you as an instructor, you can implement specific rules like that that kind of break the fundamental structure of the game and what you're trying to accomplish. So I would say that, like a strict rule, no, you wouldn't be able to use that. But again, depending on how you're using the game, you may want to allow that, you may not. And you may want to talk about it after you play this game and debrief with your students, because it could be a really great learning opportunity.
So it seems like someone tossed in the chat that it is against the rules to use phonetic clues.
Okay.
But to follow up on that,
Mhm.
for any of the games you mentioned, whether it be Hanabi, Codenames, or just one, or
Mhm.
any other games you have used in the past, do you add or modify any of the rules for your own purposes for a particular purpose or learning objective? If so, could you give us an example?
Sure. So for just one, I mentioned it before. In the game, the rules as it's written in the book, you play to a certain number of cards. However, for me, I just play until I'm tired of the activity or until we have achieved our specific learning outcome. When you're playing online, the option is to just limit it to a certain number of cards. You can make it a very short game or a very long game. Hanabi, I don't tend to change. When I've played it in person, though, I have augmented it to play with up to 6 players. The game is really only rated to 5. I haven't really seen any downside to playing with 6. If anything, it makes the game harder, so that's an augmentation there. And then for code names, I don't really augment the rules. I would say I would say that um, uh, Codenames is very much a game where you have to agree to the magic circle of it, in that there are going to be some restrictions on the kinds of clues that you can give. And I'm really going to need you to adhere to those restrictions in order to make this the best game as possible. And actually, the next game we're going to talk about, Wavelength, is one of the biggest transgressors of this rule, because the game is so open-ended, which is why I leave it for last, because it's one of the hardest games to teach because it's so open-ended. So to give you a short answer, yes, I've augmented the rules. Some games I augment rules more than others. Others I just try to leave the same.
So I have this great sort of comment by Amanda Rosen, who is a great colleague up at the Naval War College. And she says, I've played werewolf with students where I'm the werewolf and just watch them accuse and kill each other. Definitely against the rules, but a great teaching moment about what people will do when an authority figure tells them they have a traitor amongst their midst, which I think is fascinating and would love to see people at the War College do that. But if there are no more questions, we will press on to the last one, Wavelength, and we'll address sort of broader questions across all the games later.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. I just want to tell you, Amanda, that I have played Werewolf extensively with my students in the past, and it is some of my favorite educational moments watching them accuse and kill each other off when I am the werewolf. So I empathize with you. It's one of my favorite games to play with my students. All right, so going back to our content overview, we're wrapping up with our content for this presentation. So again, we address what is game-based learning, just one, Hanabi, Codenames, and now we're going to talk about Wavelength, which is one of the newest entrants in the tabletop space and is a really, really interesting party game, which we will dive into depth here. So this is a copy of Wavelength, the tabletop physical version of the game. It's very colorful. It definitely has really great table presence whenever you're playing it. It's definitely not a quiet game to play. So it's a very interesting game to play in an educational setting. So there are 2 websites where you can play Wavelength online. There are 2 listed here. I'm, again, like the other games, I'm going to go through how to play the tabletop version. Then I'll talk about learning outcomes for the game, and then I will cover how to play this on the for free online. All right, so in Wavelength, the overview is that you have a team goal. So this is like Codenames, where you're going to be broken up into one team versus the other team. So your team's goal is to turn the red dial on the physical board of Wavelength as close to the center of the colored target as you possibly can. So that's the first thing you need to do. But here's the twist. You cannot see the actual target. The target is going to be hidden behind a screen, and behind that screen, you just know that the target exists there somewhere, and you have to turn the red dial in order to try to hit as close as possible to that target as possible. And that target is going to be moving. It's going to be randomized at the end of each round. So this is what that dial looks like. And that is that red marker you're trying to move and trying to hit that target that's somewhere behind that screen that you can't see right now. So here's a stylized version of what that screen looks like when it's open. Here is the handle to the screen after it's open. And here is the dial. And you can see that based on this example, the dial has missed the target all the way that is over here. And you'll see that there's several different colors, layers to the target there, because you can get awarded different points for how close you get to the center. So here is a close-up of what that target looks like. So the two slices all the way to the edge are worth 2 points. The ones next to them are worth 3 points. And then the one dead center in the middle is worth 4 points. All right, so fortunately, because you usually have to guess where this target is, one of the people on your team, just like Codenames, is a psychic. And that person knows exactly where the target is behind the screen because they've seen it, but their teammates have not. So how do you play this game? Well, as the psychic, you are going to draw a card, and it's going to have two opposing concepts on them. So some examples of those concepts are underrated all the way to overrated, or hot all the way to cold. So here, the psychic is then going to give a clue as to where the target is located on that spectrum between those two concepts, between the two concepts. So in this case, we know that the concept that we're trying to guess here is hot to cold. And we, as the psychic, we know exactly where that target is. So we know the target is right here. So the clue we choose to give is coffee. And we're giving the clue coffee because we have not played this game before. And you'll see kind of the limitations of this clue coffee in a few moments. All right. So now it's going to be up to the psychic's team to discuss the clue and then decide exactly where they want to turn the dial. And the really, really great part about playing Wavelength is that everyone thinks out loud and they ponder all of the ideas that they have in their head based on that individual clue that their psychic gave them. But unlike the other games we've talked about, the other team can poison the thoughts in their head by giving them misinformation or just bad clues or just bad tracks of reasoning or anything else like that. And that is really one of the most fun and engaging elements of Wavelength in general, because the other team can kind of mess with you a little bit. So in this case, let's look at this clue coffee. So here's some of the discussions that people can have. So again, the spectrum is hot to cold. So some person can say, well, coffee is at the sun, so it can't really be all the way to the left. But coffee could also be iced. So technically, it could also be cold. Someone could also ask, well, I mean, on a spectrum of hot to cold, where exactly would you put lava? And in this case, like that dial, maybe they'd say maybe closer to the left. Like if the sun is all the way hot and something else is all the way cold, where exactly would you put, like lava on the spectrum here on this wavelength? So in this case, we have selected to turn the dial all the way to the left here with that clue coffee. And then it is going to be up to us to open up that screen and try to determine whether or not they hit that target. So us as the psychic, we're going to open up that screen when you're playing the physical game to reveal exactly where the dial is in the target area. So the closer to the center of the target, the more points your team is going to score, which is really great for your team because that's exactly what you want. And then the other team also gets a chance to score whenever it's not their turn, which I'll go into detail in a moment. So in this case, we decided to put the dial all the way over here with that clue coffee on the spectrum of hot and cold. But in this case, we whiffed. So we missed completely. The target was a little bit higher, and we turned the dial all the way to the left, so we missed it completely. Okay, so that is an overview of how to play Wavelength. Here is a more metacognitive perspective on the game. So Wavelength is a social guessing game. It takes a lot of the elements of Just One. It takes a lot of the elements of Codenames and kind of combines it in this new form. So here it's where two teams that compete to try to read each other's minds. So like the other games, but specific to this one, teams are going to then take turns rotating that dial to where they think a target is going to be located on the spectrum when playing the game to see if they are going to be able to hit that target directly behind the screen. So how do you set up this game? So again, I'm going to talk about the tabletop version and also the online version, which has very similar setup. So you're going to divide into two teams roughly the same size. I can only speak from experience. I've only played Wavelength with even number of players, and it tends to be best when played with an even number of players. And like Codenames, at least 4 players. Then you're going to decide who in those teams will be the psychics, the clue givers, for the first round, because this is going to rotate. Once some person has been a psychic, it's going to rotate to someone else on their team, and then they're going to have a chance to give clues into the future. Okay, so when you're the psychic, this is what you do during the psychic phase. So each round is going to begin with the team's current psychic spinning the wheel to randomize exactly where that target is going to fall on that spectrum there. And then they're going to draw a wavelength card, and then they're going to give a clue on the spectrum that's indicated on the card between those two concepts that are on that card. And then again, like the other games, the psychic is going to do this secretly so that players on both teams cannot see where that target is. So here's that wavelength. Here's that wavelength shield again. So we just know that it's closed. So if we are not the psychic, this is what we will see. But if we're the psychic, we will be able to determine exactly where that target is. So after the psychic gives the clue, they're going to stop communicating entirely. So after the psychic is giving the clue, they're no longer allowed to say anything. They're no longer allowed to do anything or give any other clues. So very similar to Codenames. You can't even give clarifications. And I want to really point that out. You cannot give clarifications because this is such a subjectively interpretative game that interpretations can actually kind of ruin it, or clarifications can actually ruin it. So you want to keep a straight face as possible whenever you're the psychic here. Okay, so after the psychic has given their clue, we're now going to go to the team phase where the other people on your team are going to try to guess. So after the psychic gives their clue, it's going to be up to the rest of the team to try to read that psychic's mind and turn the dial as close to the center of the target area as they possibly can. This is the core of the game. This is where all of the really great, fun stuff playing Wavelength happens, because you are entirely free when you're discussing. You can discuss and debate and argue in any way you like. And you don't even have to do it on just your team, because the people, if you're playing a really fun game, the other team is going to try to mess with you a little bit and try to debate your concepts. So after the psychics team has come to agreement, they then let the other team know, and then they finalize their dial position on that board, exactly where they want to point that dial at. So they're going to move it on the spectrum here between hot and cold, wherever they want it to rest. And then during this phase, I just want you to keep a few things in mind. So unlike the other games that we have identified, it's usually highly structured. Wavelength is not like that, and actually structured kind of takes away from the game a little bit. So this is pulled directly from the rulebook. Wavelength is very much based on gut feeling. So you should restrict yourself to saying things like way over to the left, or a little far to the right, or a little down, or anything else, rather than like, 25% that way, 70% this way, or anything else like that. Again, there's no penalty associated in doing this, but as someone who's played this extensively in person, it kind of ruins the game if you do. So I highly suggest you don't, if you at least want it to be a fun and engaging atmosphere. So I don't recommend you do that. So this is an example of one of those wavelengths cards. So from the worst all the way to the best. So that's that spectrum that you're trying to give a clue for based on the target that's exposed there on the wavelength card. All right, so now let's go into the scoring phase. So once both teams have finalized their guesses, it's time for the most exciting part, which is the reveal. So you as the psychic, you're going to open up the screen and see how close they came. The psychic is then going to reveal the target and open it up right there. So in the scoring phase, the active team is going to score points if the dial is within the colored target area as listed on those colored wedges. So you're going to score anywhere between 2 and 4 points here if you're on those wedges. So here's an example of that again. In this case, the arrow is pointed at 2. So the active team is going to then score 2 points. Okay, so as the psychic team, you're going to score the number of points that is printed on the wedge that the dial is in. Pretty simple over there. However, this is what's really cool about Wavelength. The other team is going to score by guessing if the center of the target is either to the left or the right of that dial prior to the screen being open. So I think that's a really interesting part of this game here. So in this case, the psychics team has indicated they want to leave the dial right there. They think that's where the target is. Now we go to the other team. The other team is going to try to guess, is the target to the left of that arrow or to the right of that arrow? And if they guess correctly, they're going to have the opportunity to score points as well. And then winning is relatively simple. Once the team has reached 10 points, the game ends, and the team with the highest score is going to win the game. Okay, so the reason I left Wavelength to last is it's one of the hardest games to explain because it's so subjective and open-ended. So here are a few rules that I've used in the past that really make this the best kind of, at least, gaming experience possible. So Wavelength is going to be all about these really wild, crazy creative rules. The following things that I'm going to talk about give methods for how you should structure these clues that will prevent the game from being broken very often. Because again, it's a very subjective game. It's easy to break. I recommend following at least these to keep the game together. However, again, we're talking about games for learning. You can feel free to adopt these to your game in however way you'd like. I'd say that of all the games we've talked about, this is the one that is most easily adopted, because you have to, really, depending on how you're using this game and your individual players playing the game as well. Okay, so one of the examples is, say you have on the spectrum safe to dangerous. So one of the clues that you can give is a Honda Accord. And the reason why you can give a Honda Accord as a clue is because it is a single concept. So unlike Codenames and unlike Just One, you're not just limited to a single word. You're just limited to what they call a single concept. So what you're not allowed to give is texting while driving a Honda Accord, because those are two concepts, texting and driving, or bungee jumping over crocodiles, again, because those are two concepts, bungee jumping and crocodiles. So one of the firm rules here is to limit your clue to one concept, and it doesn't have to be just one word. All right, so another example here. So let's say that the spectrum is masterpiece to failure. So one of the clues you can give is the Mona Lisa. However, one of the clues you cannot give is a Beatles album performed exclusively by Nicolas Cage. Specifically because the rulebook explained it has to be an actual real thing. It has to be something that has some real life component to it. Because Nicolas Cage did not exclusively perform a Beatles album, this would be an example of an invalid clue pulled directly from the rulebook. And the last example here is rather straightforward. So let's say the spectrum is peaceful to warlike. So you're allowed to say clues like Gandhi or America. However, you cannot say clues like peace or siege warfare, because they include the words that are included on the spectrum. Peace is in peaceful, and siege warfare also includes war, which is in warlike. So you were not allowed to be to give those clues. All right, so, and again, like Just One and Codenames, there are a lot of similar outcomes here. Granularity in speech and communications. This game really hits this one in stride because, like I said before, it's incredibly difficult and challenging to teach this game because it's so open-ended and because it's so subjective. But if you're using this with your students on a regular basis, you can really get in a really special, subjective, granular place in how you communicate granularity in speech and communication and whatever else you happen to be teaching. I've used it for public speaking, but you can also explore different options to use this with your individual students. And like the others, you can also challenge preconceived notions. Again, it's on a very wide spectrum between these two concepts, hot and cold, or masterpiece to failure, or anything else. So people might have a different concept of what they consider a masterpiece or what they consider a failure. So one of the greatest parts about this game is not necessarily who wins, but the types of discussion and debate that teams have with each other and the opposing team. So I would really focus on that. And the last part, like the others, is creative thinking and empathy. Again, as a psychic, you're trying to give a clue that your teammates are going to be able to guess. Knowing how your teammates think or how they might interpret clues is going to go really far in serving you as a psychic for the game and doing really well in the game overall. All right, so the two websites I recommend playing Wavelength online are these two, but the one that I've used extensively is this one, so longwave.web.app. longwave.web.app. So when you log in, you're going to be greeted with this thing right here. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to create a room similar to Just One. Now, when you create a room, you're going to have a room ID. And this is going to be up in the upper right-hand corner. And then again, depending on how you set up the game, you're going to want to select either a standard game for 4+ players or free play with 2+ players. Disclosure, though, I've only played the standard game with 4+ players because Wavelength, I think with anything less than 4 is not ideal, similar to Codenames. So I've only play tested the standard version with over 4 players. And then here, this is where you, as a psychic, you're going to have the panel of, no, not as a psychic, as the team. This is where you're going to have the spectrum of unnatural to natural, and then you're going to be able to move the target over here based on where Oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me go back. This is what you see as a psychic. So this is the spectrum, unnatural to natural. And this is exactly where the target is that you need to get your teammates to guess. And then down here, this is where you are going to give your clue and type it out. And then afterwards, you're just going to hit submit clue, and it's going to go directly to your teammates. And then they're going to have to guess based off of that. All right, so that was Wavelength. Again, a difficult game to explain and use with students, however, has really great learning outcomes, but is just overall a challenging game to implement because it's so subjective. So again, revisiting our content overview before we go into the last Q&A. In this session, we covered what is games-based learning. We also talked about Just One the Game, Hanabi, Codenames, and Wavelength. So I'm going to use the remainder of the time, or however long you'd like to stay, Sebastian, to answer any questions in the Q&A. Is there any questions we can answer?
Absolutely. So there's a question that just popped in that says, what other games do you like to use for teaching that you didn't cover here?
Let's see. I have used the Resistance, Avalon, specifically for my research and teaching. It's a similar game to like what Amanda and I were talking about before as a werewolf, because there is a traitor mechanic. I've also used that in my public speaking class. However, I like to use werewolf because it's a little simpler. Avalon tends to be more difficult when you are playing it online. There is a online version of it, but I have not used it extensively in the classroom, which is the reason I didn't bring it here. And I really wanted to present as different games and different levels of challenging games as possible. So that's the only one I can really think of off the top of my head right now.
The other question is, so as we sort of mentioned the virtual learning environment, and you gave some options for where we can find all these games, is as you're switching your game-based learning approach to your class or to other classes, what were some of the difficulties you found in translating into the virtual environment? I know it took me a semester and probably another to really get used to teaching in the virtual environment.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I would say, well, now I would just tell everyone I exclusively only teach online, so I rely on these virtual tools and these virtual games that I've showed you. But I would say, just like anything else you're dealing with students online, you have to also include some walkthrough on the interface or how the game plays. So introducing a game in the same class as when you would play it for the learning outcome might be kind of a stretch based on how your class is set up. But for me, what I like to do is I will show them video tutorials, or we'll play a practice game of Just One or Codenames before we actually use it for like a specific learning outcome or a specific debriefing outcome. And I would just give your students space to learn how to play the game first, because like I tell a lot of instructors, if your students don't even know how to play the game, then it's not a very good medium to teach with, because they have to develop at least a base level competency playing the game before you can use it for that specific outcome. So that's what I would just tell people, is to not overextend yourself and trying to like teach everyone how to play Codenames in the same week that you'll actually use Codenames. It should be a process in which, again, you scaffold your learning with your students. You introduce them to the game first, how the game plays, sometimes why you're playing the game, and then going up from there.
So a great follow-on question is, do you ever face resistance to using games, either from students or fellow faculty? If so, how do you tackle that to get them on board with gaming as an approach to teaching?
I would say that I have encountered resistance from faculty more than students. And with faculty, they're just a little bit incredulous about me using games. And I just say, well, I mean, it's my class. This is how I'm planning on teaching this semester. This is what is included in the syllabus. And generally, I have very little pushback after that point, because it's the syllabus that was approved. And that's what that is my pedagogical and andragogical approach to teaching. However, with students, I would say that I haven't had a lot of resistance from students, but some of them have questioned, like, how is this game related if I have not introduced that at the very beginning? So I'd say part of the way I've addressed it with faculty members is to say, like, hey, listen, this is why, this is the reason I'm playing this game. It's not the only thing I'm doing this semester. Like, we're not just playing games exclusively. This game is a very specific learning outcome, and this is what the learning outcome is, and this is how I intend to achieve it. With students, though, the conversation is a little bit more granular. I would say that depending on what I'm playing, I may tell them at the very beginning why we're playing the game. Sometimes I don't tell them at all until the very end, and that's a pedagogical reason. I'm not revealing the reason we're playing it because I want them through the discussion and the debriefing activity to try to determine why I've selected this or what were their main takeaways or anything else. That's how I've addressed both faculty and students in the past.
Yeah, that's great. And I know sometimes, like in my roles, like we have to support other people's classes. And I think there's sometimes a resistance to it, that it goes by case basis on how you convince people games are useful in the classroom setting. In my experience, after you do it the first time, usually they get on board because they see it with their own eyes and they feel it in their bones, and they see how the students react to it. I think that's usually the best way. Next question is, which game have you enjoyed playing and teaching the most? I think you mentioned Hanabi is one of your favorites. So do you have any other?
Oh, yeah. I would say that Hanabi is one of my favorites because Hanabi and I go way back. And actually, if this call ends on time, I might go play Hanabi with my partner tonight. But Hanabi is great in its simplicity. And it's one of those games that kind of makes me angry because I'm angry that I didn't design it, which is no slight against Antoine Bauza who designed the game, but it's just so simple in its simplicity and its approach to gaming that I really wish I had invented it, but I didn't. Other games I like to play though, I don't know if he's here. It's not specifically a game that I use for teaching and learning, but one of my favorite tabletop games is Scythe, and my colleague Thorsten Kodel, who teaches over in Germany at the German War College, he uses Scythe in his teaching and learning. He's got some really, really great materials on using that tabletop game. So I would say that is my favorite, like heavy tabletop game to play. But I've also mentioned Hanabi, and I like Hanabi because of its simplicity.
Yeah, Thorsten is great, and he has a whole module and a great YouTube video about how he uses Scythe at, I think, the German Command and Staff College.
Yeah, that's it.
I definitely understand your feelings to Hanabi because every time I play Frederick, which is by Rio Grande Games and a German game actually about the 7 Years War in Prussia, I feel the same way. I'm just like, damn, I wish I designed this game. So, so the next question is, what is the most difficult concept you managed to teach through the use of games that would be much harder without it?
That's kind of a hard one to answer. So I'll just provide you with some background on my experience here. So one of the very first games I started using when I first found this world of games-based learning is Pandemic, because Pandemic is a cooperative game. It is in the mainstream media. It's especially relevant now because we have a worldwide pandemic going on. But the reason I introduced it was I had a staff of students that were on my orientation team. And the specific learning outcome I wanted to focus on was that like our team comes from many different backgrounds from our individual college. And what I want them to realize is that on this team, no one person can do everything. You have to rely on others in order to accomplish our mission of orientation. And the reason I selected Pandemic was, one, I was playing it a lot. And two, in Pandemic, there's asymmetric roles, which means that you are going to have individual cards and roles that you play that are going to be different and are better at doing one thing versus something else. So this was actually kind of like a diversity discussion wrapped up in this game, which is what it ended up becoming in talking about our team's diverse backgrounds and what we bring to each other. So that was something that I had planned to address while playing Pandemic with my orientation team, but I did not believe it was going to, I guess, blow up into what happened with my team, which is, like they really understood the fact that like, like we just can't have all athletes on our orientation team because none of these other perspectives of other students at our school will be represented, which, I didn't want them to come to that conclusion, but they did on their own. So I would say that was a particularly hard conversation, or I shouldn't say hard, a challenging conversation I had with my students that I didn't intend to have, but I'm glad they did have it.
That's great. And I think this is more of a question which I have also thought of. If when we look at University XP and all the work you've done, someone has asked in the chat is, how do you find the time?
Oh man. Let's see. I'll tell you the impetus why I started it. So when I started researching games for learning, I knew I started going down this rabbit hole. I did my doctoral work on it, and afterwards, after I graduated, I was like, well, I don't really want to teach full time. I teach right now as adjunct faculty at NYU because I know what life is like in the academic market, and it's just not something I wanted to go down. But I also wanted to keep writing about the work I was doing. So a lot of the first articles I posted for University XP were like my dissertation that I kind of translated into non-academic speak and went out from there. But since then, like as I have conversations, as I do presentations like this, I find more and more people that are asking, really interesting questions. So what I've done is just like every day, I try to write a little bit answering a specific question about games-based learning, like what is player agency? What is the magic circle? I'm writing an article right now on why do games have player counts? Why does a game play 2 players versus 6 players versus an MMORPG like World of Warcraft? So I'd say that I don't know if I'd call it a secret, but like I just spend every day doing a little bit to answer big questions, and those things just kind of snowball, and they've kind of turned into like a blog and a podcast and a YouTube channel and everything else. And I just want to thank everyone that if you follow me, I appreciate it. I love answering these questions from people. I love learning from other people too. So thanks for the support. I appreciate it.
All right, so it doesn't look like we have any other questions in the chat, but you mentioned your dissertation, which is something that you sent me in the past, and I would love for you to sort of give us a quick overview of that, because I think it'll be of interest for this crowd, many of who are educators in the crowd.
Oh, sure. So if you want, if you're on ProQuest right now, you can just search for it. So it is Game On, an interpretive phenomenological analysis of games-based learning in a small college liberal arts environment, if you can write all that out. But if you just go to ProQuest and search Game On, all exclamation points, or all capital letters, exclamation point out of Northeastern attached to my name, you'll be able to find it. But in short, it is me using tabletop games specifically for a core group of students who I had in a leadership development class at my former institution. So the games that I used were King of Tokyo, Hanabi, I forget the name of the King of Tokyo, Hanabi, Avalon, the Resistance, and also I'm blanking on it right now. It's a cooperative game about firefighting. If anyone can write in the chat, I'm sure that one of you knows about it, but I've since traded my copy away, so I don't know what it is. But it's all about using those individual games, and it was an interpretative phenomenological analysis. So I did in-depth interviews with all of my participants and coded those interviews. Oh, Flashpoint. Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, Flashpoint Fire Rescue. That was the last one. So I did in-depth interviews with all of my participants and really tried to develop an understanding of how students make meaning from playing these individual games and what their ultimate takeaways were. So if you'd like to read more about it, you should be able to find that dissertation online.
That title was definitely the title of a dissertation.
Yeah.
If you ever heard one.
It's how can you make it as long as possible?
But yes, so I'll wait a few more minutes for people to toss any last minute chat questions into the chat for Dave. But it was absolute pleasure to have you here on our webinar. And typically we have lots of military focused wargaming, but we love to have our colleagues that do game-based learning and also use games for other reasons here at Georgetown University Wargaming Society. So it was absolutely a pleasure to have you. And for those who had to jump out at the end of our or in the middle of our presentation, understanding life is hectic these days, this webinar will be posted to the Goose YouTube channel. And please go check out Dave's awesome site, which I have referenced and send many of my students to go look at, especially when it comes to like player agency, because I teach game design. So it's good to understand these sort of basics, notions, and principles. But I don't see any other questions. But otherwise, thank you everyone for a wonderful evening here on Tuesday, and hope you guys have a good night. And thank you, Dave, again for having us, and hope to have you back sometime.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sebastian. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for coming.